Cayce, you will give the relation of this entity in the universe, and the universal forces, giving the conditions that are as personalities, latent and exhibited, in the present life. Also the former appearances in the Earth's plane, giving the time, place, and the name, and that in that life which built or retarded the development for the entity, giving the abilities of the present entity and that to which it may attain, and how. E.c., we have the entity here, and those relations with the universe and universal forces as appear in the present Earth's plane in urges and inclinations as are manifested, irrespective and with what forces in the present Earth's plane. In entering we find the entity comes, what an array! Under the influence of Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, with changing influences and many of the phases of the Moon, with the influence of Saturn and Mars. Hence, beware of ever becoming involved in any condition where firearms will be an important factor as to settling of same. Under these influences, irrespective of the will's force, then, we find these conditions as exist with this entity in the present experience through the Earth's plane. Under the influence of Mercury, Jupiter and Venus, we find one inclined to be studious, especially delving into conditions requiring study of same in detail and in miniature. Hence we find, with those other influences, the entity would and could make of self a wonderful bacteriologist. For the love that is manifest in the body, while of the nature that is sincere, is toward the peoples as a whole, rather than as of an individual thing or condition. See? That is, the body loves in groups, or in purpose, or in intent, rather than of the individual or individual condition. This, while not in that way of being a fault, produces many misunderstandings for the entity, and while the friendships and the ties that are made by the entity are sincere, are lasting, are true, yet many misunderstand on account of such conditions. These are not as faults, but the body should apply will's force in making self better understood, and not work on, or for self, hardships that are often causing depressions and being misunderstood. As to those greater influences in which the will's forces are applied in this body, irrespective of the planetary conditions, we find, while the body is not of the superstitious nature as would be termed in some respects, yet we find omens, wishing stones, or any conditions wherein there is special sentiment or special attachment in any way. These mean much to the body, and, applied correctly, may often lead to better understanding of the ways, the means, and the why-fores of much of the discord as is seen by attempted combinations, especially toward marital relations. In the appearances and the influences these have on this entity, we find these are, as it were, of a peculiar influence, for these became very decided at times, especially when the body mentally, physically, is influenced by those influences as exerted through the Neptune influence, for, as is seen in the appearance before this, we find in the land now known as Holland, and in the name Strand. The entity finds the development there, while in the position of one that was as a layman, or as of the populace, yet much was wrought in the entity's development through that period, while this experience brought many of the changes as appear in the inmost feelings of the entity at the present, and especially the colours, blue, and of the various effects that the scenery and the windmills, and the study of Holland has upon the entity, which, if studied correctly and followed to its end, would be proof much for this entity and others of those conditions as may be re-entering the inmost forces of an entity, and are almost brought entirely through to consciousness. In the one before this we find in that period, when there were changes being wrought in the land now known as Peru, the entity then among those that were in power just before the conquest, or the entering in of those that conquered or brought havoc to the peoples of that land. The entity, while not in a position of power as would be called direct, yet serving the peoples, the common peoples, the masses, through the influence that the entity exerted on ones in power, and them in the name Ishana. the entity gained and lost through this experience, bringing to many the better understanding. Yet in self-sown application we find the entity disregarded many of those conditions that it lived in one way and presented itself to be as another way, this bringing those consternations of the inmost self. In the present urge there is seen often indecision by the entity, especially when same is related to religious tenets of any nature, or of those relations as exist between sex. This becomes, as it were, a bugbear to the entity, and the entity finds itself often put to understand just why these inner feelings should arise, when it feels so certain that it knows its own position, yet inwardly feels it isn't true. In the one before this we find in the period of the destruction as wrought in Persian lands in the invading forces from the western portion of that known as India. The entity then among those carried captive into the land, and brought much, even though it suffered physically, to the peoples with whom the entity then associated, and in the name man dies. In the urges as seen from this experience, the entity dislikes anything pertaining to the nature of bondage, and is well in that way of rendering assistance to the needy, no matter what their position may be in the social world or field. This period the entity gained much, and is that urge and influence felt most in the life's experience, the life's work, in the present experience in the earth's plane, for when there came in the earlier portion of the present experience that of those conditions that brought distresses and oppression in the physical sense, these urges became more active, and as the body pushed forth its own efforts there came that intense desire to help, and the love, as given, for groups or masses, or conditions, rather than individuals, becomes the developing and manifesting self. In the one before this we find in the Mongoloid country, when those peoples were studying, as it were, the relations of the then position of the peoples to those that were heard of in the west and south. The entity then among the teachers of that day, and, as is seen, none of the explorations through the geological or archaeological findings has astonished, or even been other than it should have been found before in the mind of the entity. In this period the name Sibayu, and the entity gained and lost, through not being able to prevent the jealousies arising when there seemingly was not need of same, by and through those with whom same was associated. As to the abilities in the present earth's plane, those, as will be seen, are many, but lie especially in those lines of study and application of self towards the details for the uplifting of those that occupy positions that are of a submerged nature, on account of living, or of improper understanding of living. These, then, relate to nursing, medicine, teaching of the care of the body, of the care of person, and the relations one with another, but first make self-secure in the desires of the heart being made one with that creative force that gives, study to show self-approved unto him, the giver of all good and perfect gifts, and keep self unspotted from the world. We are through for the present.